live in a system where pharmaceutical companies have a financialized business model, which means essentially they need to maximize revenue at all costs. They can make billions in revenue, and that price goes back to the patients.
Drug companies are ripping us off. In a divided America, that belief is held by an enormous number of people across the board. 83% of all Americans, including 84% of Democrats and 89% of Republicans, said in a 2023 poll that Big Pharma's profits were a major reason why prescription drugs cost so much. And that profiteering affects a huge number of people. About 60% of us report taking at least one prescription drug. This week, a new report exposes one way Big Pharma is keeping those prices jacked up. The organisation behind the report is the Initiative for Medicines Access and Knowledge, or I-MAK. And I'm glad to be joined by I-MAK's CEO, Tahir Amin. Tahir, your report is basically about pharmaceutical companies playing a game with patents, making small tweaks to a drug to extend its patent life. Give us the top-line summary of what you found.
Yeah, the top line summary we're finding is that the way the current patent system's working is it enables pharmaceutical companies numerous ways to extend their patent monopoly. So when the main patent should be expiring, companies get an extension under the current system, and then they're adding other patents with these incremental tweaks so that instead of the patent running out after 14 years, they're running the life up until 16, 17, 18, 19, even 20 or more years. And in that period, they can make billions in revenue, and that price goes back to the patients.
Absolutely. And to that point, I mean, sometimes I think discussions of Big Pharma become perhaps too abstract sometimes. This has real world effects, and you mentioned the effects on pricing on patients. So it makes a lot of people's lives more difficult by these prices being, in effect, artificially elevated, no?
Absolutely. So, for example, once the patent system's supposed to incentivize the R&D, the discovery, the research, but at a certain point it should end. Unfortunately, we live in a system where pharmaceutical companies have a sort of a financialized business model, which means essentially they need to maximize revenue at all costs in order to please their shareholders, the Wall Streets of the world. And by doing so, what they're doing is they're finding different ways, and the patent system is one instrument that they use to extend their monopoly. And so they can keep increasing those prices whilst they have that monopoly, keeping competition off. So instead of drugs getting under competition like they do in Europe 6 or 7 years earlier, here in the United States, we're having to pay the premium prices for much longer.
In relation to that, one drug that your report focused in on was Eliquis. Now, I'll have to work from my own notes here because I'm less familiar with it than you are, but basically this is a drug that works to prevent blood clots. Its patent originally would have run out in September 2022. Its corporate owners, which are Bristol Myers Squibb and Pfizer, basically had what are called follow-up patents, 5 different follow-up patents that extended the patent life of this product by well over a decade. And you figured that that meant more than $50 billion in revenue for the drug companies. Is that right? And have I characterized it correctly? And isn't that kind of outrageous?
I mean, that you've characterized a big part of it. What happened is that patent, typically you get 20 years from your filing of a patent on your main patent. And that, as you said correctly, should expire in 2022. But unfortunately, back in the 1980s, we have this system which was good in one way because it brought in many generics. It made it easier for generics to enter. But there was a trade-off that was made where companies got what we call a patent term extension, guaranteeing them up to 5 years extra patent life due to regulatory delays. As a result, in the case of this Eliquis drug, they got that 5 years, so that pushed it, I think they got 4 years actually, so it pushed it out till at least 2026, and then with this other patent these other patents they filed, they push it out till 28. In Europe, generics have already entered in 2022, and so these extra 6 years in total that they're getting exclusivity on, it's going to basically mean that we're paying $50 billion to branded Eliquis, i.e. Bristol Myers Squibb. And what's even worse is if we look at the other drug that we look at in the report, which is the GLP-1 drugs, which are a big phenomena at the moment. Similar thing happened with for Novo Nordisk. In that case, because of the popularity of the drug, there's three drugs in that case, three products, and they're going to make $166 billion because of just the patent term extension. Forget about all the other patents that they file on afterwards.
Mhm. And, you know, for people who are watching this conversation and find it as frankly outrageous as I do, that companies are able to get away with this, sometimes I wonder, do people look at the sums of money involved and think, well, what can we do? These pharmaceutical companies kind of have the regulatory process or the political process tied up to a certain degree. What do you say to people who feel that way? Are there things that can be done realistically to change this picture?
I think, yes, you've mentioned it, the pharmaceutical industry and the patent lobby itself, if you want to call it that, has immense hold of the patent office. And remember, the patent office, which grants these patents in the first place, it's supposed to be a public office. It's supposed to actually act in the public interest. And I think one thing that people can do is actually to express, obviously, get an understanding of the system. I know it's technical, but express your concern of why companies are getting all these patents. I think write to your representatives, write to them and say, I understand that patents or longer monopolies are causing higher drug prices. Now, of course, there are many people on Congress who do receive industry money, but I think there's a growing concern around the behavior of pharmaceutical companies and how they use the patent system, and I think it's becoming more and more transparent now that there is a serious problem.
And that transparency or that perhaps greater public anger, you think that that anger could be perhaps used to fuel change and to fuel change for the better for the majority of people in this instance?
I believe so. I think as more and more people are actually becoming more aware of the role that a patent system plays, because typically culturally it's been considered kind of sacrosanct. You don't criticize the patent system. I think that sort of dam is breaking, and I think it's important for the public to really become more and more in tune with how the companies are using the patent system for their own gain, and not as it was originally intended to bring out these groundbreaking medical discoveries. Now it's a system of how much money can I make? It's become an ATM.
Mm. You just alluded to one of the arguments, perhaps the chief argument that the drug companies or people involved in the patent industry make, which is essentially that patents fuel inventiveness, allow companies to spend many years in clinical trials knowing that a lot of drugs won't actually work, but you need the patents to create the profits that make the research viable. Just go in a little bit more to what your response is to that argument.
Yeah, look, I think no one's denying that you need incentives, but I think the system we have today is, and it shows in just in terms of like in a related report to the one we just put out with the GLPs, Novo Nordisk spends more on buying back shares and paying off its shareholders than it does on R&D. So this idea that they need to charge higher prices, the pharmaceutical companies need to charge higher prices so that they can do the R&D is actually not entirely true. In fact, it's actually becoming more and more apparent that that is not the case. And this is just the way the pharmaceutical companies have just started acting like Wall Street private investors. It's a lot of the drug research originally starts with the government money, the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. Pharmaceutical companies come in, yes, they commercialize it, but commercializing something does not mean you're inventing it. So there's a lot there to unpack. And I think we're not saying that the pharmaceutical companies don't have a role to play in bringing these products to market, but they're not actually doing all the R&D.
And given they have so much financial muscle, do you think that organizations like your own can get traction? I assume, frankly, that a lot of the public is probably sympathetic to the argument you're making. But is it difficult to get the message out when are not valued as places like Bristol Myers Squibb or Pfizer are at tens of billions of dollars? Is that an uphill battle?
I think in the last 6 years, since we've actually brought a lot of these issues to the fore, I think we've actually made some traction. I mean, 6, 7 years ago, and I'm not just saying my own organization. There are a lot of people in the field, academics, who've been raising this issue. And we're seeing now Congress has acted in some ways to try and tackle. They're more aware of patents. We see patents. There's actually just a slew of bills that just went through Congress. Now, I'm not saying those bills are going to resolve a lot of these issues that we're seeing, but they're a start. And thinking, you're looking at a system which is 200 years old or more. It's going to take a little bit of time. So I'm actually confident that we're starting to see some cracks in the sort of the hold that the pharmaceutical industry and other patent lobbies have had over the patent system. And I think the more and more we start to expose it, the more actually I think Congress is going to have to act at some point, because there is a generally a concern on both sides of the aisle that the lack of competition is actually driving prices up. And I think it's not just a sort of a left or right issue, it's an everyone's issue.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I agree. I think if some of those cracks you mentioned got a bit deeper and wider, I don't think it would greatly discomfort many people, regardless of whether they position themselves as conservative or liberal in the rest of their politics. So I guess just finally, to hear you do have an element of optimism as to where this is all headed. You think that progress really can and is being made from your side of the debate here.
I think the progress is being made, not quick enough. I don't think we're going to turn this around tomorrow. I think there's still a good few years before we really are able to get the kind of legislation that's really going to make an impact. Some of the legislation we've seen so far is a slow start towards it. What we need to do is we need to get further upstream to the root of the problem. And the root of the problem is in any drug pricing. It's not just the pharmaceutical benefit managers, which is what the industry wants you to look at or Congress wants you to look at. It's actually starting with the drug companies and how they use the patent system. That is what gives them the power. And we need to address the root of how they get that power.
Tahir Amin, CEO of I-MAK, we really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us on the Hill.
Thank you so much.